All right, good evening and welcome. My name is John Forster. I'm a senior this year from Carmel, Indiana, studying history, political science, and Spanish, and I'm also a Project Impact student. We thank all of you for coming, and we ask you to help us thank the Project Impact partners who make our forum series possible, and their names are listed on the slide behind me. So let's just give them a short round of applause. All right, we look forward to an exciting evening tonight with three nationally known journalists who will take the stage shortly, but we also need your participation. Here to explain one part of it is Lisa Abrego.
Hello everyone, my name is Lisa Abrego and I am a senior in political science and also a Project Impact scholar. Tonight we would like to encourage audience questions, and you can do this in one of two ways. First, you can pose your questions when our moderator, Ms. Swain, asks for the question portion, and you can find the microphones in the two center aisles. Or if you prefer, or if you're watching live streaming online, you can pose your questions on Twitter. The Twitter account is @project_impact, and we will have Alicia moderating them and we'll pose the questions. Now here is Jennifer Toole to explain another very important part of our forum.
Good evening. I'm Jennifer Toole. I'm a senior studying political science and a Project Impact student. I'm from Highland, Indiana. Tonight, as in past presidential issue forums, we want to know a little more about you, our audience. So here's how we're going to do this. We're going to have you pull out your cell phones. I know most forums ask you to put them away, but we're asking you to take them out. And you're going to pull up your texting function. In that, enter the digits 37607, also behind here on the screen and in your brochure. For each answer, you're going to first type the two letters PU for Purdue University, and then the numbers that correspond with that. So first, we're just going to get to know you a little bit. We want to know your age group. Easy enough, right? Okay, so pull out your cell phones. And we want to know, are you under 18, 18 to 25, 25 to 35, 35 to 50, or over 50? Is somebody in the audience controlling that? Okay, so we're glad that we do have a wider range of people, but it looks like it's mostly students in this audience tonight. So that was easy enough, right? Okay, so next we want to know, how important is the issue of the economy as you consider your vote for president? Is it the most important of all issues? Very important? Somewhat important, not so important, or no opinion? Okay, so it seems that the economy is an important issue. So next we just want to know what economic issue concerns you the most in the 2012 election. Is it lack of jobs, the national debt and budget priorities, entitlements, taxes in the U.S. tax code, healthcare, or no opinion? Okay, thank you all so much for participating. We're glad that we got to know a little bit more about you as an audience. Now I'd like to introduce to you our Director of Project Impact, Ambassador Carolyn Curiel.
Thank you, Jennifer. It is my pleasure indeed to welcome all of you here as well, and also to work with the terrific students of Project Impact. You met a couple of them this evening. Let's give them a hand, please. So we're not done testing the audience, just so you know. There are going to be several other poll questions during the night, so if you would keep your cell phone handy, we'll be asking a few more questions keyed to our topic of the evening, the election, the economy, and you. And I want to introduce our panel now. A very special group of people who have come here to help us to analyze what is going on with this election and the economy and other related issues. First, Nick Gillespie, Editor-in-Chief of Reason Magazine. Nick. Charles Blow, columnist with the New York Times. And our moderator for the evening, Susan Swain, President and co-CEO of C-SPAN.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for not being rain averse. There was quite a thunderstorm that sprung up out there, and good for you for all getting here to be with our two terrific panelists tonight. And in the best interests of the Lamb School and Project Impact, this is a seminar or a session that is of students, by students, and very much involved with the students. The students invited our two guests tonight. The students selected the polling questions and also pulled the clips that we're going to use. And we want very much for you to be involved in this conversation because our theme is the economy and you, how this all affects you and your vote coming up in November. So let me just jump into it. Where are we after last night's debate in this presidential election? Charles?
Okay, first of all, I do want to say this is the first panel I've ever been on when I don't have to turn my phone off, because I love that.
But you have to vote.
I have to vote, right? I called the first debate for Romney. I called the second debate for Obama. And, you know, part of what happened in the first debate, Barack Obama just didn't show up. I don't even know who that person was. And Romney was forceful, and regardless of whatever you believe about the veracity of what he was saying, he was forceful. He seemed to have some conviction. He seemed to lay out some sort of plan, whether or not you actually were able to delve into whether or not it would work or not. It seemed that he believed it. And you know, coming into that debate, he was on the ropes, you know, and people, many in the middle, had decided that this was not someone who I'm willing to take a chance on. Even if I don't like the guy in the office, White House right now, this is not an acceptable alternative. Mitt Romney was able to use the first debate to turn that opinion and get people to take a second look and say, I am comfortable at least looking at this person again, and he may be an acceptable alternative. Now, Barack Obama last night was able to, he can't erase the performance in the first debate. It is a fact, it happened, you can rerun it in clips and people will YouTube it. but he was able to say, I am a live human being. I am committed to fighting for my own job. And that is what he did, and I think it allowed a lot of crestfallen Democrats to take a breath for the first time in 2.5 weeks, because they couldn't figure out what had happened the first time around. So, you know, I don't know what ends up with the drift and the surge and how the polls will rate this, but I do believe that it is possible that it sets it back at 0 and we are back to the race that we thought we were going to have in the first place, which is it's going to be very tight and come down to a couple of swing states, and those couple of swing states will decide the election.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with that analysis. The first debate was certainly, I think, the first time a lot of people, possibly Mitt Romney and Ann Romney, actually could see Mitt as president. You know, before that, and I think the second time, you know, Obama realized that if he loses his job, it's going to be really tough to get another one in this economy. So he, you know, really shut up. You know, for me, and I do think we're back kind of at parity, which actually is something, you know, and I say this as somebody who is not a Republican or a Democrat. You know, for it to be at 0 is actually a win for Romney, because going into the first debate, he was points behind. You know, so it's setting up a good third debate. Unfortunately, it's about foreign policy, where I think both of these guys are terrible. But more to the point, coming out of last night's debate, I still don't have, you know, I have a sense of Obama's economic plan. You know, if this is, the economy is the big issue, you know, I know what he wants to do because he's been doing it. And Romney, I don't really have a clear sense, you know, so on the one hand, Obama's policies haven't worked, really, by his own measures. And then you have Romney who, you know, what does it mean? You know, yeah, he ran a successful business, et cetera, but, you know, so what's he gonna do first day when he gets in? And does it, you know, he said last night, you know, the president, the government doesn't create jobs, but he says he's going to be in charge of the economy. So what does that mean? I'm still left wondering, you know, the future doesn't look particularly bright to me, well, if one of these guys wins.
That actually would reinforce a Pew poll that I saw this week that suggested that over 50% of people who had made their decision were not certain about what their candidate would do. Or actually comfortable with what they understood their candidate would do once they got into office. So there was really a lot of uncertainty about both these choices out here. What I want to do, though, before we get more involved in this, is learn just a little bit more about you, because you're going to be offering your opinions, your analysis, and it's important for people to know where you come from. I'm going to start with you, Nick, because this is the College of Liberal Arts sponsoring us today, and here you are, the quintessential successful liberal arts graduate. Nick has a PhD in English literature. How did you get from...
You know, it'd be nice to get some applause for that. Thank you. It's not like I got a lot of money for it, so.
So how did you get from there to Reason Magazine?
Well, you know, just very quickly, I went to undergrad at Rutgers University in New Jersey, and I worked on the student newspaper, and I was an English major and a psychology undergrad. When I graduated, I worked as a journalist. I edited various teen magazines and music magazines. If anybody, you know, out here, I ghost wrote an advice column for Alyssa Milano for a year. And if any of you wrote into her, I'm very sorry for the advice that you might have gotten. And then after talking to rock stars and teen stars for a couple of years, I decided to go back to grad school. And I liked reading, so I went for literary studies. I had been, while I was finishing up my dissertation in American literature, I'd been a longtime reader of Reason Magazine, which started in 1968. It's a small L libertarian magazine about politics and culture. We're kind of socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And they advertised a job opening, and I was kind of sick of academia, so I applied, and you know, then I slowly started knocking people off on the masthead.
People often. I was about to say I know about knocking people off on the masthead, but that would be rude.
No, yeah, that's right. I mean, the real question is, you know, you're still co-CEO. This is like co-regent. We know this isn't going to...
So people often make the mistake of equating libertarianism with the Republican Party or being right of center. Is that true?
I think for some people it is, and there's no question sociologically, I would say, the libertarian movement carried traveled a lot of similar ground with the conservative movement in the post-war era, mostly because there was a very mutual dislike of international communism, and so there was a lot of that. But certainly at least since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War, libertarians and conservatives are probably as likely to be at each other's throats as anything else. Libertarians tend to be very non-interventionist on foreign policy. They tend to be very in favor of open borders, both for goods, but especially for people, which is causing problems among conservatives. Drug legalization, lifestyle, marriage equality, all of these things put us at quite a distance from conservatives. At the same time, there's certain things, free expression, which used to put us in a clearer footing with liberals, with traditional liberals or conventional liberals, and some of that has faded. And then, of course, the libertarians tend to be pretty laissez-faire in terms of the economy, which again links up with conservatives and Republicans. But then, if you want to sell a lot of certain types of things, and that can include soda now in New York of a certain size, that'll put you on the wrong side with a lot of people. So we're not really right nor left, but we are powerful, and we like to think we're good looking. We like to believe that we're deciding every possible election, except the next one.
I wanted to say that the size of this audience makes this really a terrific opportunity to have this be a conversation as opposed to a panel presentation. So really looking forward to your questions, whether you send them in by Twitter or if you come up to the microphone in a few minutes, and we will get to them in just a couple minutes. Jennifer, I'm also going to ask you to get ready with our next polling question. We're going to mix polling questions and some video. Oh, there you are. Polling questions and some video throughout our discussion here tonight. While you're getting ready for that, Charles, you have a rather unconventional route to a New York Times column. Would you tell our audience about it?
I have no idea how to abbreviate this. I did this afternoon in the classroom. It took like 30 minutes. So let me figure out how to do this. But so I went to college wanting to be the governor of Louisiana because those guys have a blast. And so I majored in English and pre-law. I was going to go to law school and then get into politics. And I had an English professor who didn't really like his job, and he basically said, well, why don't you major in mass comm and pre-law instead of English and pre-law? You still get to write. There are not that many differences in the courses you take. And so, young and impressionable, I said yes. And in our mass comm major, you had to pick a discipline. And one of them was visual communications. I've always been good, kind of an artist, but not because of art school or anything, just naturally. And I figured, how do I keep this scholarship and go to every party that I could possibly go to? And it was by majoring in visual communications. So that was basically how I got into the visual part of the news business. But because I had been a mass comm major, I always brought the reporting side of what I did into what I did as a visual journalist. And so that made me a little bit of a strange duck in this field and a commodity. And so it meant that I got some really great jobs. And one of those was at the age of 24 years old, I became the graphics director of the New York Times. And I did that for a very long time, and I left for 2 years to be the art director of National Geographic magazine. And I came back because I was literally commuting from Brooklyn to DC every day, 4 days a week. And I said, I took the December off one year, and I realized that I was never going back to work, and I called my boss and said, I'm never coming back, right? And he said, I know you're never coming back. So he said, you can do it from home for a while, and Bill Keller, who's the executive editor of the New York Times, had been pestering me forever to come back to the Times, and they said, okay, how do we make this work? And I knew that they were doing these op chart things as freelance. So, being a manager at the Times for so long, I knew they didn't want to spend any more money. They was going to juggle some money around. So I said, take that freelance money, build it into a salary, let me be the guy who does that on staff, and I will be the guy who does charts on the op-ed page. And I thought that that was what it was going to be. I did my first one, and I wrote a little intro, because Andy said, you have to write something to introduce the chart. And I immediately realized that no one in the entire world was reading this thing the way that I was designing it. That they were reading it as, look at this tiny, tiny column with a chart. And so I then had to switch my emphasis from producing a chart that had an introduction to writing a column that was accompanied by a chart. So I sometimes call myself the accidental columnist. I also think that I had one of the craziest on-the-job training assignments ever in the history of journalism, which is to learn how to write next to 9 of the best op-ed columnists in America on the fly, on the job. So that is how I got into this.
Well, there's lots of lessons for students in the audience today about becoming a commodity and finding a way to use your degree in interesting ways in the work world. So let's do our next polling question, which is question number 4 about who is most to blame.
Okay, so please take your phones back out. And who or what is most to blame for the economy's woes? Is it the president, Congress, all of us, the 1%, European fiscal crisis, Wall Street, or you're not sure or have no opinion?
I just want to object that my parents aren't on that list.
Okay, then we'll see the results. And as we're watching the results come in, this question interests me, Nick, because of the comment that you made about the president being able to create jobs.
Right.
So we focus so much energy on the person we put in the White House, but how much really influence can a president have over the state of the American economy?
Well, if, I'm happy to talk about that because...
Look at the results. All of us is number one.
Yeah, look at that.
Oh, still moving.
Yep,
but
Congress. Yep, now it's...
I think we're influencing the outcome.
Yeah, merely by watching it. You know, one of the things that I've done over the past decade or so, actually, is kind of draw continuities between Bush, George W. Bush, and Barack Obama. And on their financial policies, there's a lot of reason to believe that. I mean, Bush clearly, and as a backdrop, I mean, I think, free enterprise or the economy by and large is a huge thing. Government can affect that in all sorts of ways. It can do it in a good way by creating clear, fair, and non-distorting regulations that allow people to have more information and to make better choices. Can do things by, minimizing transaction costs, things like that. But it can also do more, and more often it does damage by subsidizing certain types of behavior, including, for instance, home ownership in ways that went out of what natural demand, if such a thing exists, would have happened. It particularly was signaling throughout, for all of the 21st century, that if you were big enough, if you got too big to fail, you would be bailed out, and thereby severing risk and reward, I think, in a really detrimental way in various kinds of financial markets. But when you look at between Bush and Obama, there's been so much kind of intervention into the economists. And then when you also tack in something like the Federal Reserve, which at least since the early days of Alan Greenspan has been creating cheap money, which has a distorting effect on where people put money. And you make a lot of what's Austrian school economists would call malinvestment. I think the government has a lot to blame, is at a lot of the blame here. Individuals, people are going to follow incentives, and government, to the extent that it has an effect on the economy, I think it's been making a lot of bad incentives, viable. So.
Well, I think the choice, though, I think is false to say that government does not create jobs. I mean, the truth is that the Department of Defense is the largest employer on the planet. Right? And
which is not a good thing.
I'm not saying it's not a good thing, but the idea that people will say, oh, government does not create jobs, the private sector creates jobs, and yet if you say that you are going to cut defense spending at all, then people start to hue and cry and say, well, that's going to cause job losses, because those are people who are employed to some degree by the federal government. And then if Mitt Romney then says that I want to set a defense spending at an arbitrary rate that has no relationship to war or readiness or whatever at 4% of GDP, you're basically ensuring that the industrial defense complex creates even more jobs. So basically, you are endorsing the idea of the government being an incredible job generator at the same time that you say that government does not create jobs. So it's a very strange kind of argument to make, and most people do not connect those two dots.
No, I agree with that. And, and again, when you look at defense spending, and I spend a lot of time looking at the federal budget, so you don't have to, but federal spending on defense, and it's I prefer to call it military spending because it's actually not about defense. As you were saying, and why 4% as opposed to 10% or 1% or 3% or 47%? Why pick 4%? Is a strange thing, but there are proposals to say we should always be spending 4% of GDP on defense spending, and it's ludicrous, but it's totally out of whack with what the needs of the country are in order to protect ourselves and protect our interests overseas. And it's a waste of money because every engineer, say, who is hired by a defense contractor, and every lobbyist who is hired by a defense contractor in order to lobby for an extra engine for a particular plane that we don't need in the first place, those are wasted resources that could be going somewhere else, or having people doing something more interesting with their time. A lot of smart people get diverted into that. And I agree with you, and more to the point, one of the problems is that with both, I think, Obama and Mitt Romney, they're not piecing together, they ride their own hobby horses in a way. So it's true, Mitt Romney is like, government can't create jobs, but we need a lot of defense spending. And by the way, defense spending is great because it really, helps to jumpstart the economy. You can't have it both ways, but each side is constantly trying to.
I'm ready for mixing in your questions. So if anyone wants to start walking to a microphone, and how will I know if I have tweets? We have tweets. You have tweets, all right. Would you like to read a question by Twitter?
Go ahead and stand up to the mic.
All right, so our first question by Twitter is from someone who is watching it at home by our live stream. And they ask, should threshold for including third-party candidates in debates be lowered?
So as a society in making this choice, what are the pros and cons about having people on the stage that are likely not to be elected president? Last time it happened was Ross Perot in 1992.
Right, and certainly Ross Perot enlivened, and Ross Perot was a major factor. I mean, he, by most accounts, cost George H.W. Bush the election against Bill Clinton. He had ended up with something like 20 or 22% of the vote. I think more voices are always better, whether we're talking about television stations, whether we're talking about music, whether we're talking about magazines, you name it. So I would like to see more, and I think you could make a threshold where it's something like, is the candidate on the ballot in enough states to win, as opposed to saying, and I think it currently now is that you, in order to be included in the presidential debates, which is run by a commission that was formed by the Democrats and the Republicans, but if you're, you have to reach 15% in the national poll.
Right.
And, it just, I would like to see more.
So Charles, as a citizen, and on your journalist hat, but would you prefer to see more voices or confine it to the people most likely to get the job?
Well, I think we're getting to a dangerous spot in our politics in general where polarization is basically grinding our government to a halt. And that means that the strictly two-party system may not be working. And the thing that we kind of revere most, which is the Constitution, is basically what has set this up. And so now we have the situation where, the Republicans have used the filibuster very effectively in the last 3.5 years. And because of the degree to which they have used that tool, it will forever be used hereafter. And so if you don't have more voices, people who are not necessarily part of majority party and the one minority party, how do you break this stranglehold on government? Because now we will always be running for the next election. We will always have a midterm 2 years into whoever is president. We have the Citizens United has ensured that anyone can flood the zone with, millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. the ability to stop us from doing what we must do as a country is so great that I think that there's going to come a point, whether we want it or not, where we're going to have more voices.
If I just to follow up quickly, two things. One is that a record number, the largest single voting bloc in America, the plurality, it's over 40%, are self-declared independents. And this is part of the book that I wrote with my colleague Matt Welch, which is on sale in the lobby, and I put gold coins in a couple of the pages, so I'm not saying which ones, but Republicans and Democrats have been leaking market share like Chevy Novas used to leak oil since the early 70s, and there are more independents than anything else, so we should open it up for more voices, which, by the way, I think Citizens United did. Citizens United gets beaten up a lot, but it's actually been good. It's opened up speech opportunities for more people. And just as a final point about filibusters and budgeting, one of the reasons we don't have a budget, and we haven't had a budget in at least 3 years, and actually a fully kind of worked out budget, you have to go back to the 90s for, as opposed to creating a federal budget through omnibus spending bills. It's because the Senate Democrats have not produced a budget to be voted on in 3 years. It's a guy named Kent Conrad, who was on the Super Commission, which last year was supposed to come up with a few cuts in trillions of dollars of spending, weren't able to do that. He single-handedly, it's not a Republican, a democratically controlled committee run by a guy who's been in the Senate for about 1,000 years and is considered a wise Solon of the most distinguished legislative body in the world, has not done his job. He hasn't brought anything for anybody to vote on in 3 years. And that's his fault, and I would argue it's his colleagues' fault. It's government's fault ultimately, but it's not the result of a Republican plan.
Social scientists keep wondering whether or not social media is changing the way we interact as people, but I keep seeing folks tweeting questions rather than coming up to the microphone. So if any of you physically want to come up to the microphone and be part of the discussion, we invite you to do that.
My question alludes to the partisan polarization you just spoke to in the last question. Ultimately, does the fault lie with Congress and the president, or does it lie with us as citizens who every year vote in the same elected officials?
That's what I was wondering if people were getting at with all of us as being the most selected answer on who's responsible for this. What do you think?
Well, I do think that we as a citizenry are becoming more polarized in general, and that is feeding, that's why we elect the people that we elect. I mean, you don't have to look further than cable news. I mean, CNN tries to play straight down the middle. They're not getting the same viewership as people who play heavily to the right or to the left, and we kind of want someone to kind of validate what we already feel. I always say, I could write about feeding my dog. If I had a dog, it'd be on top of the most email list. People kind of want voices. They want personality journalism. They want someone to weed through all of the work that you would normally have done in your own private life and probably come up with a very nuanced position on things that wasn't all the way to one extreme or another, and you might be, fiscally conservative and socially liberal, and you may even amongst some of those issues you may have some quibbles. But now that kind of dissension does not have a place in society. So the idea that you could be a little bit confused, you're like a leper. So, people don't want to have anything to do with that. And so we end up sending people into government who kind of reflect that in us. And we are becoming more like that. And that is a problem with government and people.
I agree with a lot of that in terms of the people that we're electing are not necessarily, or I guess maybe this is a little bit different, are not particularly representative of where the country is. There's a really interesting political scientist named Morris Fiorina who is either at Stanford or the Hoover Institution, which is a think tank based there. And he looks at kind of public polling data, and there's actually broad areas of consensus in American life. So for instance, 60% plus believe that abortion should be legal under some circumstances. which is huge. And you always hear about abortion being divisive. About 60%. I mean, he has like a whole list of 60% plus things, believe that immigration is a good thing. And there's actually a broad area of overlap on whatnot, which doesn't get reflected in the political process, which I think is somewhat problematic. What I do think is going to happen, because the political parties are losing their hold on voters, because people are saying, I don't want to be a Democrat or a Republican anymore for a variety of reasons. They will get more and more extreme, but what you will start to see, and I think this would be a healthy development, are ad hoc kind of groups of people pulling together where they believe or they agree on one particular issue, and that's it. And they don't talk about building a new party or a new kind of unified field theory of politics. And in this election, I find the most interesting race. I'm a big proponent of drug legalization. I think that drug prohibition is stupid, and the costs of it are just vast, and the benefits are virtually zero. And in places like Colorado, Washington, and Oregon, you have these weird groups of people that include religious, right-wingers and super liberal, kind of granola, Birkenstock-wearing lefties pulling together to legalize marijuana. They don't agree on pretty much anything else, but they're willing to come together on that. And I think that may become more and more the future of politics as the parties can no longer deliver reliable chunks of votes that they used to.
Where does the Tea Party fit into your description of those kinds of groups?
The Tea Party is, I don't know, how many of you have a positive vision of the Tea Party? And then many don't. The Tea Party was fascinating because, and it got a huge amount of, antagonism, most of which I think was misplaced in terms of like they were racist or they were violent. They really were neither of those things. But this was a group, and I covered a lot of the Tea Party events in D.C. and whatnot. There were public school teachers there, who aren't you're expecting to be, some kind of, knuckle dragging, I don't know what a stereotypical right-wing profession is, but all they agreed on was stop spending as much. I mean, that was the early message of the Tea Party, and as long as they stuck to that, it was a pretty vibrant movement. Once places in Arizona started saying, let's stop spending as much, and let's start going after immigrants, and let's start talking about gay marriage, then it fell apart because to the extent, and whether you like it or not, to the extent that they stayed on one issue, they were effective and they were a force.
But that issue also plays into what I think kind of clouds the rise in independence, right? So there are a lot of disaffected people who are very conservative who now call themselves independent. There are a lot of young kids who think it's more fashionable not to say that they're Democrats and they call themselves independent. But when you look at their overall voting records, they almost invariably vote to the same, right or left, and they're not really centrist. There's a much smaller group of people who are genuinely kind of independent and will move back and forth between parties.
Yeah, no, I agree, and also that independents are not the same as centrists. It's a lot of different types of people. Although I will point out, it was either CNN or Gallup had a poll, polls recently, they do this was in September, but whereas 60% plus of people agreed that government was trying to do too many things that individuals and businesses should be doing. And at the same time, about 60% plus said that the government should not be promoting a single set of values, whether it's traditional values or whatnot. And that's, there's a consistent and coherent position that explains those two positions. It may not be giving voice in the people that we can vote for, but it's an interesting development.
Lisa?
Hello. We briefly talked about the third presidential and last debate coming up, but I was wondering, what would you like to see, and what should we watch out for in both issue development and the presidential candidate's character presentation?
Charles, want to start?
I don't know if maybe I'm kind of sidestepping your question a little bit, but what I would like to see is a little bit more discussion about the kind of systemic poverty in America. Like the people who, when we talk about poverty, to the extent we talk about it, which we almost never do, we talk about it as if these are people who were fully employed 4 years ago, they had great jobs, they lost their house because they lost that job, and those are the poor people in America. And if we could only kind of jumpstart the economy back to where it was, then we wouldn't have that problem. That is not true. And there are real kind of systematic problems that exist where we have a huge chunk of the American population who are poor or working poor, low income in America, and how do we deal with that group of people and not always use them as scapegoats to talk about growth of entitlements? Because if you really think about who has benefited from entitlement growth in America, it is not the most poor people. It is elderly people. It is the people who's like, I see a new spot on my wrist, I need an x-ray and a CAT scan, and I need $5,000 worth of tests to make sure that this is not an A spot. That is where most of that spending goes. It is not for the $250 per month that some family gets for food stamps, right? So until we start looking at how do we deal with the poor people in America and how do we try to help transition people out of poverty, encourage kind of responsible living, but also kind of job training and giving them ways to get themselves out of poverty, not social nets that become hammocks, but really social nets that are there to help people who need help and then find ways so that they won't need help for the rest of their lives. That discussion is always so heated and it's so much finger pointing to the degree that it even exists. I would like to have a sane conversation about that group of Americans.
Yeah, I mean, that would be, I think, really a fascinating and useful discussion. And just to put some numbers behind what Charles was talking about in terms of entitlements, you know, the three big entitlement programs are Medicare, Medicaid. Medicare is health insurance or for anybody over 65 and older. Medicaid is supposed to be health care for the poor. And Social Security, which goes to people who are now, I think, 67 and a half, and it'll creep up a little bit. Most of all of that goes to retirees who, as a class, are far more wealthy than any other sector in the population in terms of assets, which also makes sense because they've been saving their whole lives. But even 60% of Medicaid goes to retirees. So it's, you know, Medicaid, 40% of Medicaid goes to poor people. You know, so we haven't had that discussion, and it would be fascinating because there are plans that work and plans that don't about transitioning people out and kind of giving people a legitimate shot at breaking any kind of cyclic or systemic poverty. The other thing that I would love to see, and I don't think that the debate formats have done it, I don't really care about the character of people. I don't know what that means, and you know, Bill Clinton did not seem to have such a great character, but you know, we have 8 pretty good years, or at least 6 pretty good years under him. You know, I don't worry about that, but I would love to see in a foreign policy debate to actually have these guys lay out, look, here's my vision for what American foreign policy is, and you know, forget talking about anything, you know, anything fleeting right now, but you know, what is the role of America in you know, in the 21st century? I mean, we're running the clock out on the 21st century, and we're really not doing very well. So I would love to see something like that be addressed. Well,
given the format, we may get to the latter, which it's foreign policy, but I don't think either of your other topics are going to be addressed in this final debate.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let's do it's actually a great time for our next question, which is polling question number 5, and it's about Medicare. Interesting reminder that our audience, the largest number was student age, but then the second largest number, baby boomers. So this polling thing will be interesting to find out your opinion. So take us through it, please, Jennifer.
What best describes your opinion about Medicare, the government health insurance program for seniors? We should do what it takes to maintain the current program. I support modest changes such as increasing taxes and means testing recipients. I support more fundamental changes such as creating a voucher program, or no opinion, not sure.
Now, while the answers are coming in, could we please get clip number 3 ready, which is the Vice President talking about Medicare, and we'll show that after we have the results.
Susan, we're going to do that one more time, giving the codes for those who can't see in the back.
All right.
Okay, one more time. If you pull out your cell phones and text in 37607. For the first response that we should do what it takes to maintain the current program, please enter PU25. For the second response, I support more modest changes such as increasing taxes and mean testing recipients. Please type in PU26. I support more fundamental changes such as creating a voucher program. Text PU27. And if you have no opinion or you're not sure, please text PU28.
Thank you. So let's watch the results. Interesting that there's only a few percentage points between fundamental change. Oh, it's moving up. How about that?
If I can jump in, I hate to tell people who were hitting PU27, but vouchers or premium support is not a fundamental change. Because the whole point of it is basically to make sure that Medicare sticks around. A fundamental change would be to get rid of Medicare or any program that is designed to treat seniors as a distinct category that needs to be protected. The fact of the matter is as I was mentioning before, since like the 80s, people 65 and older are the only income or age group that has seen massive increases in their assets and their net wealth. We should not be treating seniors, our grandparents are not our grandparents' grandparents, if that makes any sense. They are not feeble and they are certainly not poor. I would suggest that, what we should be doing, and everybody knows that Medicare is the single biggest problem in terms of budgeting into the future. Between 1975 and 2010, the number of enrollees doubled and the amount of money in inflation-adjusted terms doubled per enrollee. That's going to double again over about the next 25 years. It is unsustainable by anybody's measure. And here's a simple reform, which would just be, if you can afford health care, you should pay your own way. If you can't, then we can figure out first off, how to create a better system so it's actually market-driven and cheaper and better, like it is in all sorts of other things that we do. But why we're treating 65-year-olds as if that's a magic number, and then we need to throw trillions of dollars at them, which come out of, how many people here are under 55? This is, it's coming out of your paychecks, about 15% of your paycheck, and that'll go up. It's going directly into the pockets of old people who may or may not need that money, and you could be using that to save for your retirement or buy a house or, get like that extra shot of vanilla in a chai latte or something.
Well, given the level or the direness of the problem from an economic standpoint for the country, let's listen to the level of debate going on in the presidential campaign trail. This is the vice president in the vice presidential debate talking about Medicare. Clip number 3. Fingers crossed here.
Medicare. What we did is we saved $716 billion and put it back, applied it to Medicare. We cut the cost of Medicare. We stopped overpaying insurance companies, when doctors and hospitals. The AMA supported what we did. AARP endorsed what we did. And it extended the life of Medicare to 2024. They want to wipe this all out. It also gave more benefits. Any senior out there, ask yourself, do you have more benefits today? You do. If you're near the donut hole, you have $800, $600 more to help your prescription drug costs. You get wellness visits without copays. They wipe all of this out, and Medicare becomes insolvent in 2016. Number one. Number two, guaranteed benefit. It's a voucher. When they first proposed, when the congressman had his first voucher program, the CBO said it would cost $6,400 a year, Martha, more for every senior 55 and below when they got there. He knew that, yet he got all the guys in Congress and women in the Republican Party to vote for it. Governor Romney, knowing that, said, I would sign it were I there.
Okay. So if you'd load up clip number 5, we're now going to listen to Governor Romney from the first debate with the other side's point of view on Medicare.
Medicare. What we did...
Whoop, that's the vice president again. It'll take just a second for it to load. And as you're watching this, I'd like to have your thoughts on how seriously we talk about these issues in our political process.
Well, I think that
You're around 60 or older, you don't need to listen any further. But for younger people, we need to talk about what changes are going to be occurring. Oh, I just thought about one. And that is, in fact, I was wrong when I said the president isn't proposing any changes for current retirees. In fact, he is on Medicare. On Social Security, he's not. But on Medicare, for current retirees, he's cutting $716 billion from the program. Now, he says by not overpaying hospitals and providers, actually just going to them and saying, we're going to reduce the rates you get paid across the board. Everybody's going to get a lower rate. That's not just going after places where there's abuse. That's saying we're cutting the rates. Some 15% of hospitals and nursing homes say they won't take any more Medicare patients under that scenario. We also have 50% of doctors who say they won't take more Medicare patients. We have 4 million people on Medicare Advantage that will lose Medicare Advantage because of those $716 billion in cuts. I can't understand how you can cut Medicare $716 billion for current recipients of Medicare. Now you point out, well, we're putting some back. We're going to give them a better prescription program. That's $1 for every 15 you've cut. They're smart enough to know that's not a good trade. I want to take that $716 billion you've cut and put it back into Medicare.
Okay, we get the point of it. So you were saying?
Well, I mean, one thing that I think that we have lost the ability, or never even had the ability to discuss, is in how we deal with end-of-life decisions. And, you know, a couple of years ago, we got to when we might have had one line or one passage in the healthcare law, and it became the death panel discussion, and now you can never talk about it again. But, you know, part of it is, you know, Social Security is separate from Medicare in a way, but you know, when it started, incredibly successful program. When it started, half of all seniors were in poverty. Now, like less than 10% of them are poor. People look at that as like a safety net, and younger people look at it as a safety net for my parents and my grandparents, and they don't want to bother that. We want the end of life to be comfortable, as comfortable as possible. But put that aside and look at the medical issues that come along with end of life. What we see is that those things that we do to extend a life by a week or a month or maybe a couple of months become incredibly expensive. But we, instead of having a philosophy where we look at this and say, what are our benefits? Can we ease people into this? This is inevitable anyway. We can buy you 3 days, it's going to cost us $300,000. Is that smart use of money? And right now, we're basically allowing this to just be like, whatever makes you feel better as a family, let's spend as much money as we possibly can. That is not a sustainable situation. I think that, you know, if there was a way to pull back from that and say, can we have smart, rational discussions about end-of-life treatment so that people do not end their lives in pain, but we also don't spend tremendous amounts of money to extend lives by a week or 2 weeks. That discussion is, you know, some European countries have philosophies how they end lives in this respectable way without spending that kind of money. We don't have that discussion yet in this country. I think we do have to get to a point where we do have that discussion.
Is anybody here over 60? Because I'd love to hear what you think about that. You know, can we start talking about when we should pull the plug on you? No, I agree. I mean, and I agree fundamentally with Charles about that. You know, and I forget what the exact stats are, but you know, it's like 150% of all healthcare spending happens in the last 15 minutes of life. You know, I'm exaggerating slightly, but it's, you know, most of your life you're not actually doing that much in terms of medical costs, and then it really ramps up, you know, right when you're about to die, and it seems kind of an inefficient and unsustainable way to do it. But the question really is, who's we, Kimosabe, when we're talking about we need to make a decision? This is one of the arguments for getting the government out of healthcare as much as possible, because I would like to be as much as possible in control of those decisions for me and my loved ones, and I would like you to be able, you know, to deal with that, because we have different, you know, different value systems about that. And I might have lived my life where, you know what, I didn't eat a lot during my life so that I could, you know, stay alive in a coma for an extra couple of months or something, you know. But so the extent that we can do that, I do want to say about, and this should trouble anybody here who has kids or anybody who has parents, the pandering in those two clips is unbelievable when Joe Biden is saying, you know, it's like, ask yourself, are you getting more free shit from the government than you were, and then vote for us because these other guys are going to, you know, pull the plug. And then Mitt Romney saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I mean, that's just like classic vote buying, and it has to stop. And I do think we're only beginning to get to a place where we can start talking about that, because Charles is right. You know, when Social Security was passed in 1935, the first checks were cut in 1939. To be old was to be poor and basically to be about to die if you made it to 65. When Medicare was passed in 66, and I guess it went online in like 67, it was self-consciously talked about as the last act of the New Deal, and old people were more likely to be impoverished than the average. That changed, and not simply because of Social Security and because of Medicare. It's because of a variety of things, including people working longer and you know, changes in the economy. But we need to get out of that mentality. We can't expect to go into the 21st century and this economy with entitlement programs that were basically set up for the Great Depression.
Okay, just because our idea with this panel was to help people understand the choices. So based on what you heard from both sides there, is the American public being presented with a choice, a fundamental choice on Medicare, or permutations of the status quo?
I mean, just very, because I've already said it, no, I don't think so. I think that, you know, the other side of the debate still needs to be had.
With the selection of Paul Ryan, people said that there was going to be a very big choice between the two. From what you're hearing, do you think on Medicare there is a big choice in front of people?
Well, I think that whether or not the program continues as a government-run program or if it is a voucher program is a big difference. I guess we disagree on that, and I think that that's a choice that Americans will have to make.
How about another tweet?
Our next question from Twitter is, what should the role of government be in an economic recovery?
Okay.
I'm going to go broad and not be narrow on this. You know, we keep hearing about how, you know, who can create the most jobs. Mitt Romney keeps saying, you know, I have a plan to create 12 million jobs. And I think he has said at least at one time that this is over 4 years. But independent analysts basically say, no matter who's the president, just by natural growth, you'll still get 12 million jobs. I think we have to look at this as a bigger, broader issue and say 12 million jobs is nothing. Jim Clifton of the Gallup group wrote a book, I guess it's early this year, called The Coming Jobs War. And Gallup has all this data, it goes back like 70 years. And what they did was they looked at all of the polls they'd ever done for everybody on the planet. So of the 7 billion people on the planet, about 5 billion of those people are of working age. 3 billion of those people say that they have now or they want a full-time job. There are only 1.2 billion full-time jobs on the planet, right? And the jobs that are the best jobs, the jobs that will pay the most, are also the most easily outsourced jobs. Those are the STEM jobs: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. I can build this iPhone somewhere else with a labor force that is more highly educated and costs me about a third of what an American workforce would cost. And that's what companies are doing. And what we have kind of this concept that there's kind of corporate patriotism, that if you start a company in America, of course you're going to keep all the jobs in America. Of course you're going to want to keep, you know, the workforce here. Well, corporations are not behaving that way. Corporations are basically saying, I'm going to look for the best deal for my investors and for the company. And they're looking for the cheapest, best, smartest labor with the best kind of tax benefits. So both candidates have basically said they want to lower corporate taxes, so both of them are on the same page on that point. But that does not mean that we still have a labor force that is smart enough and will work for low enough wages that will produce the same amount of profits. And so what we have to kickstart ourselves into understanding as Americans is this idea, everybody understands now. This is not, you know, 200 years ago. Everybody understands. There's so many people there's twice as many people who want jobs as there exist jobs. So what some of the fastest growing economies in the world are doing are just pouring massive amounts of money into building public education systems. We in America are squabbling about whether to dismantle a public education system and basically say, we should let charters take over because our schools are failing. That probably is a mistake. You have giant corporations who are trying to locate into the hotspot zones in America, and their biggest complaint is we can't find enough smart kids in this country to make this feasible for us to do. We have ExxonMobil now on television in the middle of political ads running teacher quality ads. Has nothing to do with oil. They know that they need engineers. They're not here. We don't even have enough tradespeople. We don't have enough. There's a shortage of welders in America. Our fundamental way of us thinking about education is that we are still living in some sort of bubble, like we will somehow magically produce all the jobs that we need for all the citizens in this country, even as the kinds of things that create the most income, the most value, companies like Angry Birds. Who has Angry Birds on their phone, right? So everybody, they did a valuation of Angry Birds. They think that this thing, if it were a publicly traded company, would be valued at $1 billion. How many people does it take to create it? They create it one time. This is not like building automobiles. You're not cranking screws every time an app is downloaded from the iTunes store, right? They do it one time. So basically, you need thousands of people creating Angry Birds just to keep up. That is not gonna, we have to change what we are doing in terms of how we instruct people to go into higher education. We have, we had a season of people occupying Wall Street and occupying everywhere else. You know why? Because you had $150,000 in debt in your art history major. And there's just not enough people openings at Christie's to sell paintings for $1 billion. This just doesn't work that way. So I had a meeting with with a guy on the New York Fed, and he threw me like a million slides. And one of them was, we have more people, this is so good I can't even check it. You guys can Google it. He said that we have more people now majoring in sports administration than engineering. What kind of society is that going to produce? Right? We can't sustain that. What you have to do, understanding that we are now coming to a jobs war, is that you have to say the role of the first generation out of poverty, and this was his theory, which I actually bought. Your job is not to go to college and follow your passions. Your job is to go into some field that will allow your family to build intergenerational wealth so that the next generation, or maybe the generation after that, can go to college and follow their hearts.
This is from a group of liberal arts majors.
Yeah, I'm talking to school best known for its engineering program, Land Grant School.
Here's the question,
I'm sorry, if I can just say real quickly a couple things. One is that maybe the problem in the United States is we spend too much on education. When you look at K through 12 education from 1970, per pupil funding, from 1970 to about now, it's basically tripled in real dollars. All of the national metrics are completely flat, the National Assessment of Educational Progress. We are paying 2 to 3 times more for exactly the same product. And you wouldn't take that if it was your computer, if it was your car, if it was your toaster, but we're putting up with it in education. And I would argue that the problem is that the education system is too centralized, so that bad decisions get flooded out through the entire system. And things like charters are good, not because they break unions, but because they decentralize the decision-making and the discovery process that markets are very good at coming up with. The other thing, if I can just say about what's the role of the government in economic recovery, it is first, do no harm. There is a fantastic book about the Great Depression called The Forgotten Man, which actually argues counterintuitively, but to my mind, totally persuasively, that FDR's constant interventions, and actually starting with Hoover, FDR talked about bold, persistent experimentation, which is a phrase that Obama picked up on. But he was constantly doing different things all of the time, often that worked at odds with one another. And what that did is it extended an economic recovery process. I think that we're seeing the same thing happening. It started under Bush. Bush is the person who pushed TARP, which I think was a mistake, or at least the trigger was pulled on it much too quickly. He started the auto bailout, which was both illegal and stupid to begin with. Obama has continued these policies, and every time you bleed a little bit more, we end up looking like the Japanese, who have been doing the same thing now. Those of you who are older might remember Japan's Lost Decade, which is so successful because of constant little interventions by the government in terms of the money supply, in terms of subsidies, in terms of bailouts, that Japan is now in its 25th year of a lost decade, and we're doing exactly the same things we're doing. The government should stop doing as much.
I'm moving from Jim Lair to Candy Crowley. Nope, you can't talk right now. We have only about 5 minutes left, so we want to get another question.
So there's nothing more American than paying taxes. So can you talk a little bit about how we should structure our tax code?
Do you think it's uniquely American to pay taxes?
Yeah. No, it actually is. We have about the highest compliance rate. What's fascinating is that when you look at countries like Greece and Italy, most of the European countries, not so much the German and Scandinavian countries, but Americans pay more of the taxes that are due. I mean, so it's kind of interesting in that way. I would like to see something, first off, the idea behind taxes, and we've totally lost this. When you talk to any politician, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, a liberal or conservative, they're always like, where can we squeeze to get as much money out? I think we need to have a fundamental discussion about, what is the role of government that we want? How much government are we willing to pay for? You come up with that figure, and then you figure out what are the best ways to raise that revenue, as opposed to saying, we're borrowing 40 cents on every dollar that we're spending, and so we're just looking for new things to tax and we're going to cut this tax because that'll favor my constituents, but we're going to raise this one and that one. First, we need to say, here's the amount of government in a given year that we think that we can afford, and then figure out how to pay for it.
And I'm going to do like Mitt Romney and circle back and insist on responding to something you said, which is this one piece about education that I think that completely gets lost in the education debate, which is the quality of teachers and how we change in the quality of teachers change in American schools. And if you look at what was happening basically prior to kind of women's lib movement, there weren't a lot of options for women, and a lot of them chose teaching as an option because it was one of the only professional options that they could choose. So you were funneling some of the brightest minds in America by default into the teaching profession. After women's lib, after things opened up, there were more options for women to, if you were smart and great at math, you didn't have to become a math teacher, you become an engineer, whatever you wanted to be. We didn't respond by making teaching an attractive option to compete with the other options that a lot of these very bright young women had. We kept the same sort of incentive structure, believing that it's a calling and the great teachers will always come and be teachers. That is actually not how it works. So you look at the best, highest performing school systems in the world, they basically take all of their teachers from the top third of students, and then they weed them out based on whether or not they have good bedside manner. Most American teachers come from the bottom performing third of American classrooms. That is the fundamental shift.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. And I'm not sure that, some of the implications of that, if we could get Susan off the stage and, back into the classroom. But it's, one of the things that I will say in defense of American education, including the college system, and, is that no matter how dumb the students are and how, disappointing they are in their various performances, somehow they manage to graduate and have higher paying jobs than I had when I came out of college. So, something is working, and, there is a lot of benefits to the American educational system, I think.
Well, we're just about out of time, but since Indiana has been a swing state, I thought it would be very interesting at the end here just to see the political temperament of our audience. So we're going to do a little poll here on how you're planning to vote. and November 6th. So if you would lead us through how the answers would go. We can't hear you.
If you are eligible to vote, how are you likely to cast your ballot? Type in PU 42 for President Obama definitely, PU 43 for Governor Romney definitely, PU 44 for President Obama likely, PU 45 for Governor Romney likely, PU 46 for none of the above, or PU 47 for sitting out this one.
So if you think they all stink, just PU.
How about that? Let's see how this goes.
Wow.
No double voting out there.
Still moving. So about...
Can we check to make sure that everybody has a valid state issue ID?
So we...
We're also getting some responses from our live streaming.
Great.
How did Indiana vote last time? Did it go for Obama? Yeah.
Well, it looks pretty settled in here, and with the likelies and definitelys, strong showing for President Obama. Well, gentlemen, as we close out here, you know, I was thinking that every election since I've been cognizant of them, it's been cast in terms of this is the most important election of your life, therefore you must go to the polls. Is this one fundamentally more important than any that you've experienced?
Well, I always look at presidential elections. I don't think that presidents, I mean, they can set agenda, but the biggest thing that a president does is nominate people to the court. And we now have, what is it, 5 justices over 70 years old or something like that?
And I think a couple of them are lying about their age.
and in recent history of nominating people to the court, they keep nominating them very young, so that they're late 40s, early 50s, which means that they could basically be on the court for 30, 40 more years. That means that whoever kind of makes the next few nominations to the court will probably be the last person to do so for the next 20 or 30 years. That means that until these over 70 people kind of graduate out, every election for me is the most important election.
I think this election is important. I don't think it's, cataclysmic. It's a coincidence that it's happening in the year of the Mayan apocalypse. And since there won't be a 2013, we can take this one, waste your vote this one time. But I do think that we are coming up against a fiscal reality which will change. I mean, America now, the level of debt, and when you look at economists like Carmen and Vincent Reinhardt and Ken Rogoff at Harvard have shown that when national debt exceeds 90% of GDP for 5 years or more, there's something called a debt overhang, where even if interest rates don't go up, et cetera, for the next 20 to 25 years, basically economic growth is reduced by about, overall of that period, about 1/3. And that's huge, and we are going to have to come to grips with the massive spending imbalance. And that's going to happen, whoever is president, who's ever in Congress. I think we can do it more wisely and more smartly. And for me, the real frustration is that I don't see either of these guys really coming to grips with that. I think there are some interesting people in Congress to look for, and they're being more realistic, and they're also the ones who are talking across the aisles.
Well, thanks very much to our online and our in-person audience for being here and for your participation tonight. You can see why the Project Impact students invited Nick Gillespie and Charles Blow. Fascinating, interesting people with lots to say about the political process. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
We have one more order of business. In honor of our guests, we had a little drawing, and we did not. Okay.
Well, my name is Chad Barker, and I'm a Project Impact student. And on behalf of Project Impact and Purdue University, I'd like to express our heartfelt gratitude to our panel and also to each of you for coming out this evening. We hope to see you at our future Project Impact events. And I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Swain, our C-SPAN partner, once again for some final comments.
Okay, well, my final comment is that all three of us will stay here for a little while to talk to you if you're interested in one-on-ones with us. And don't forget that Nick's book is available, and he's willing to sign any copies that people buy them.
And for an extra $5, I'll even sign my own name.
Thank you very much again for your time. Nice to have you all with us.